topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
What's working on purpose anyway? Each week, we ponder the answer to this question. People ache for meaning and purpose at work, to contribute their talents passionately and know their lives really matter. They crave being part of an organization that inspires them and helps them grow into realizing their highest potential. Business can be such a force for good in the world, elevating humanity. In our program, we provide guidance and inspiration to help usher in this world we all want, working on purpose. Now, here's your host, Dr. Elise Cortez.
Welcome back to the Working on Purpose program. Thanks for tuning in again this week. I'm your host, Elise Cortez, joining you live from Dallas, which is home base for me. If you don't know me yet, I'm a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, organizational logotherapist, inspirational speaker, social scientist, and author. My team and I help companies discover and articulate their purpose to thread it through culture and operations. We work with forward-thinking or forward-reaching organizations to develop inspirational leaders who create cultures where people actually want to come to work and do their best. You learn more about us and how we can work together at elisecortez.com. One other bit of news I want to share with you is my next book, The Great Revitalization, How Activating Meaning and Purpose Can Radically Enliven Your Business, is due out March 2023. You can pre-order your copy at bookshop.org or barnesandnoble.com. With us today is Jeff Rabith, a vice president at Thought Ensemble, a Pariveda company focused on helping clients achieve significant business transformation. Today, we'll be talking about his perspective on how the Great Resignation presents a valuable opportunity for leaders to strategically gain and develop talent. He joins us today from Denver, Colorado. Jeff, welcome to Working on Purpose.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
And an important question to start the conversation with, am I saying your last name right?
Rabith? Yes, you are.
Rabith, fantastic. So important. And identity, as an identity researcher, I cannot say your name incorrectly, right? Just too important.
No problem.
So I'm anxious to talk with you. I've been having a few conversations on air, Jeff, about really the state of today's workforce. And part of the reason I'm writing this next book is to help the leaders that are just really, they just don't know what to make sense of this crazy world we find ourselves in. So I first want to talk about how what we both know is today's workforce is employee driven, which is already a hard thing for a lot of companies to swallow. And that means companies need to put more effort and resources into attracting the talent they want. And one important way to attract the right talent that we want for companies is to fully detect and articulate their purpose to prospective talent. That's totally my world. I've seen so many companies do this well and others that are struggling to do it. But your perspective on the idea of using and articulating purpose as an attractant.
Yeah, I think it's crucial in today's market, right? It used to be that companies would only look out for the shareholder, and that was really their purpose, was to maximize value for shareholders. And then over years, it's kind of changed to be a little bit more sustainability focused, but now even more employee focused. And so employees have had a lot of time to reflect, through the pandemic on what they're really looking for out of a job. There's McKinsey research out there that 2/3 of people are actually reevaluating the type of work they want to do and what their purpose is. And so I think it's important for people to be able to connect their employees' purpose or their purpose to their employees, and then also to those that are actually looking for work, being able to articulate to that during the interview process.
Mm-hmm. To your point, Jeff, one of the things that I've learned by hosting the show for the last 7.5 years is apparently the whole shareholder focus, what really arose in like about the 1980s or so. And then, of course, if you look at the Business Roundtable statement, I think it was 2019, that said the definition of a corporation is to serve all stakeholders, not just the shareholders. That was kind of, I think, the beginning of a major wave that started to change the tide here. Any other perspective? The pandemic certainly also did factor into people saying, what do we want to do with this thing called work? Should it really be a 4-letter word? Does it have to be a 4-letter word?
Exactly. No, completely agree. It's one of those things where people had time to spend with their families. And I think that really helped them gain more perspective on what they wanted out of work. They want a lot more than just paying the bills, right? They want a job that's actually going to contribute to make things better, whether that be, better themselves, better relationships, better communities. And so I think they're really looking for that. And so the more that a company can kind of articulate that, in there, and really let the employees see how their personal kind of mission and values kind of line up with the company's and where the company's purpose is, you're going to see a lot more employee engagement. If they can see themselves in the work, they can see how they're actually contributing. And you can do that a couple of different ways, right? It can be either directly through the work that they do or how their role fits into the organization. And if that ignites some of their passion and purpose, then that's a good fit. Or simply enabling them, right? If the work actually supports some of the extracurricular work that they want to do that helps support their purposes, another way companies can kind of articulate and get behind that.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that you said earlier in that, what you just uttered there, that I want to expound on and call out, that I don't think is evident to a lot of leaders and companies, and that is that really up until very recently, when I say recently, I mean the pandemic, most people really did organize their lives around their work. Today, people want to organize their work around their lives. It's a huge seismic shift. And I think that's one of the things that's causing so many leaders just to really go, I don't know what to do here. What do I do? Well, it's on its head now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, people had flexibility during the pandemic. While there wasn't a lot to be able to go out and do, but people were able to, avoid the commute and things like that. And as they started to do that, they started to see how they were maximizing their own time and really looking at how does work fit into my life now versus how does my life, work around my work.
Yeah, exactly. And so back on the notion of how do we really enliven people to want to work, one of the things that you said that I thought was really interesting when we did our pre-call prep conversation is you said companies need to share the stories of the good work they are doing in the community so prospective talent is compelled to be part of a company doing good. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, the younger generations are really looking for employers that align with their values, right? And so as we look at organizations that take care, of that in some way and do a social impact is what they're looking for. And so the more you can articulate that, and it's not just saying it, but it's actually showing it. So you really need your employees to feel it and see it. So they need to demonstrate how they improve society. For example, Thought Ensemble, while we participate in community service acts and things like that, we actually encourage all of our employees to, serve on nonprofit boards. We have a social impact circle where we're actually looking for opportunities to give back beyond just, monetarily, but actually contributing services and things like that as well. And so those pro bono aspects and things. And I think that's really getting people's attention on, how are companies truly connecting with the communities that they serve.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. And to that end, perhaps related tangentially, one of the other things you and I talked about is regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's interesting your perspective. You say people are starting to understand why this is so important. And then you went on to say that the millennial generation, which is also called the Y, Generation Y, and Z generations want to know if a company and its leaders are really living this policy.
Absolutely. I mean, beyond being the right thing to do, there's a lot of research that shows that diversity and work and financial performance are all linked, right? I think it was McKinsey came out with gender and ethnic diversity is actually correlated with profitability. And so while it's right for the company in many ways, these younger people are less worried about how that actually impacts the company's performance and more actually how it impacts their own personal performance. And so when you bring diverse teams together in areas, as everybody comes into making decisions, right? We all have our unconscious bias based off of just how we were raised, what our experiences are, and that influences our decision making. And so as we move forward and build these diverse teams, you have a higher probability of eliminating some of those biases because we don't all have the same ones. And so a diverse team will generate greater number of ideas, which actually then creates better engagement, better thinking. And so really makes grades much smarter if you can get to that diversity number.
Mm-hmm. And then you also went on to say that the companies that advertise that they've got this diversity, equity, and inclusion policy and how they're living it, they have the upper hand. Say more about that. How does that help?
Yeah.
Because you're talking about how to attract talent in this segment. So how does that help?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So as people are looking at it, a lot of people who are leaving companies are leaving because it's not a diverse area that they're in. There's some studies out there that are suggesting that it's actually a higher correlation of not having diversity is the number one thing that actually creates a toxic work environment, a toxic culture. And so in those areas, people are leaving. And so what they're looking for is that diversity, that culture that's protecting itself through that diversity. And so that's a large thing. If you can advertise that, you can actually attract those folks that are actually leaving because of that as a cause. And I think that was one of the top causes. It was 10 times more likely to leave for that than it was for compensation issues.
Yeah, so let's speak to that for just a moment. So, one of the other things that listeners and viewers may not be aware of in terms of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, is that there's really now another letter there, and that's B for belonging. So, what if we play this out in the workplace? When no diversity is present, people don't feel like they belong, right? That's the gosh, nobody looks like me, nobody sounds like me, nobody thinks like me. Nobody values what I value, and therefore, that sense of belonging is severed. So they don't feel like they're connected to the organization. So that's the other side of this business that I want to be sure and talk about, so that we finish the thread of how it all hangs together.
Absolutely. People need to see themselves in leadership roles. They need to see that they're actually going to get the same opportunities of others, right? And so it's not just on the belonging side, but it also does hit that equality side. Is, do they have
Mhm.
an equal chance? Do they see equal representation across the board? Thought Ensemble's done a lot to really increase what we're doing around DEI. We've always, we were a women-owned business. We were recently acquired by Parveda in December, and they have a lot of DEI efforts as well. But as we look to increase that, to really show that our, not just to our employees, but actually those we were trying to attract, is how do you go and find these diverse candidates, right? What is the right way to do it? Everything from the way we're writing job descriptions needed to change, so that we could actually show the talent that we actually were speaking in, words that they could see themselves in. We weren't biasing things towards, males applying more than females and things like that.
That's wonderful. I appreciate, Jeff, hearing from the actual trenches. So this show is really it's a combination of a few things. One, it is absolutely a thought leadership platform that advances the conversation on creating workplaces where people actually want to come to work and do their best. Inspirational leaders lead them to their greatness. We do business that betters the world, and it's also an expose of companies that can showcase some of these best practices. So I appreciate very much that you're sharing what you're sharing. And to that end, this is probably a perfect cue up for the next thing I want to ask you. I was asking you to be able to share an example of a company that's practicing a unique strategy to attract talent today. And you said, my company is doing that. So what are you doing?
Yeah, so we're doing a couple different things. Within our interview process, we're making sure that people are actually getting to meet a diverse group during the interview process. They can ask different questions and go through that. We're also advertising to what we actually do in the DEI, right? We talk about, we've got a Jedi Circle, which is really looking at justice, equality, diversity, and inclusion. We also, during those interview processes, also talk about how we have belongingless lunches and things that we're doing around that. So as new employees come in, we're really looking for that opportunity to have them make connections. And so we talk about that in the interview process, about how we'll ask them to share about where they live, where they grow up, so they can really connect with people and just feel a lot closer in the community. And so those are a couple of the areas that we're really looking at. How do you change your interview process? What do you look for in that? As well as we're changing a lot of our case studies as well, to make sure that they're representative and fair across, equal across all gender, race, and all those.
So I want to probe into this a little bit further here. So you probably don't know this, Jeff, but I started my human capital career 25 years ago in recruiting. So that a bit about attracting talent and bringing them in was the beginning of this for me. So I'm interested in, are you socializing that this is, if you guys come on board, this is what we do? Is this on your website in terms of the job sections? So, okay. So they know in advance.
Yeah, they know a few of the DEI things in advance, but a lot of it is we're socializing it with them during the interview process. And so that doesn't necessarily help us attract the diversity. It's more once they're in our pipeline, they're getting exposed to it. But we're constantly seeking out what's the next level that we can do, and where can we post our jobs on job boards that are going to get just kind of a wider, more diverse group looking at our job offerings.
Awesome. So one of the things that was compelling to me about having you on the show is you talked about how your perspective was, and you crisped this up for me where I have this wrong, but something to the effect of the great resignation that we're in is an opportunity for organizations to retool their processes to attract and develop talent. So from the attraction vantage point, can you say a little bit more about how companies can take better advantage of retooling their attraction processes?
Sure. I mean, so as they're looking to attract new candidates, it's basically, where are they advertising? How are they writing their resumes, or not the resumes, but the job recs, the language that they use for those, introduce bias, which will actually put off people from applying. And so taking a look at that and retooling that, there's different technologies out there that will help you do that. Also making sure that the way you're actually looking at candidates and evaluating candidates is actually fair and equitable. And so there's also software. There's Interview IA is a way that we're doing it. It helps us make sure that we're asking a standard set of questions in a way that's non-biased and allowing us to actually fairly evaluate candidates against one another.
Mm-hmm. We're going to talk about developing talent in the next segment, but I have to wonder if you're also, because you do invest in employees' education, not just business skills, et cetera, and you give them assessments like Strengths Finders and Hogan's HPI, Whole Brain, et cetera, which are fantastic. My question to you is, are you also socializing that on the front end before you hire them as a way to entice them to come to work for you?
I know we do talk about the employee development side of it. I don't know if we call out the exact strength finders and whole brain that we basically give from an educational standpoint, but we absolutely talk about developing and investing in employees, right? A lot of employees are really looking, one of the top things that's attracting people right now is the ability to grow. And so how are you advertising to potential candidates that you're actually invested in their growth? And one of the ways we do it is during the interview process, we actually share the different training that they're going to get. We talk about we actually have a expectations framework. We touch on that a little bit, which really just kind of helps you understand the skill sets that you need to have at each level to be successful. And then we talk about some of the training, and we don't just do training that develops you in your professional side, but we look a lot at the training that develops you on your personal side. And those are the things like the whole brain and strength finders we do. We also do a lot of DEI education. And just open and honest conversations where people can be vulnerable. So we're really trying to build that trust, and we talk a lot about that extensively during our interview process.
Just quickly on that note, this is a good time for me to shout out last week's conversation with Stephen M.R. Covey, who has got to be the trust, genius of the world. So catch that episode. Let's grab our first break. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. We've been on the air with Jeff Rabith, who is the Vice President of Thought Ensemble, a aggravated company focused on helping clients achieve significant business transformation. We've been talking a bit about how to attract talent in today's great resignation. After the break, we're going to talk more about how to develop them to make them want to stay. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Dr. Elise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Elise to speak to your organization, please visit her at elisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Elise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Elise, send an email to Elise, A-L-I-S-E, at elisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to the program. Before we get into our conversation with Jeff, I do want to invite you to check out my book, Purpose Ignited, which I put out in November 2020. And I really wrote it to awaken readers to their passion and purpose and start them down the path of becoming an inspirational leader to help their team members be led to their greatness. I hope you'll check it out. If you are just joining the program, my guest today is Jeff Rabith, the Vice President of Thought Ensemble, a aggravated company focused on helping clients achieve significant business transformation. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. So for this next segment here, Jeff, I want to focus just on investing in talent, developing talent. And one of the things that I really appreciated you said is so many organizations are not doing that today, and people are so hungry for it. I'll just say quickly, I just delivered a session for a nonprofit in San Antonio last Friday. 25 people, and it was probably their first session they'd had in a year. I mean, literally, they were just leaning forward and hanging on every word. They were so hungry for that development, right? So, and you talk about this whole notion here relative to investing in people, and this is really interesting in the time period of the remote work that people are having such a hard time trying to deal with, how do we get people to come back to work? And you said it's important to bring people back to the office for the right reasons. And you say 2 days per week to forward the thought and put things on the whiteboard kind of sounds like a good way to go. Can you say a bit more about, what's some of the right reasons? How can we manage this?
Sure. So people have proven that they can be very productive working remote. So if you're now going to attract them back, you've got to give them a really good positive reason to want to come back. Lots of people do. They want to come back. They miss that interaction with people and things. But at the same time, others still want that flexibility. And part of investing in those employees is keeping that flexibility for them, allowing them to kind of move their work schedule around to accommodate children and other things, and just other things that are in their lives and that are important to them. And so part of the investment is, how do you balance those two things? And when you're looking to bring people back to the office, one of the big questions is, what's the strategic purpose in bringing them back? And so while you can be productive elsewhere and working remote, we know that it's more fluid if you're in person for certain things. And so some of those things that we look at that's more fluid in person interactions is really around, things that require you to pick up on nonverbal cues, or really trying to foster connectivity at a deeper level, or creativity. And so what we've kind of seen is, when we try to be creative and you're designing a process, while you can be effective remotely, it's much more effective if you can get people in the whiteboard. They can stand up, walk around, write things on the board. And then you also have the fluidity aspect of people kind of talk over each other. And when you're doing it on video, it always interrupts somebody else who's speaking. And it's kind of hard to know when you can jump into the conversation. And so you really have to make sure that, as you're bringing people in, that they're understanding that, hey, we're asking you to come back to the office so that we can have these types of dialogue and this type of creativity.
And then creating an experience for them that's compelling. And just this afternoon, I heard of something that I thought was pretty useful that I wanted to pass on. This is a senior leader that I've been working with for a while as a coach. She's in an organization that I've been working with. She just happened to mention to me this afternoon. She said, I stumbled on something really fun and interesting for my team. And she said, what we're doing is, I've got a 1,000-piece puzzle sitting out in an area. And people come by and they might just, drop in for 5 minutes or 10 minutes. But we're finding that they're like, I missed my puzzle time today. I miss connecting with Joe, hearing about how many pieces he got in today. And I thought, how delightful. You've created a place where people come to play together, think together, maybe even as they're looking for pieces, creativity and innovation happens, great ideas happen. People that wouldn't otherwise stumble across each other maybe find themselves across the puzzle. I thought it was delightful. What do you think?
I agree. I think that's a great idea, and it's a great concept, and it really does that. What we're missing in the virtual world is that ability to have those chance encounters,
Right.
and around the water cooler conversations and things like that. And so, as you bring people back to the office, I think that's a great idea of doing that, or putting out other types of puzzles and things to let's see who solves it, and how do you gamify coming back to the office, so to speak.
Yeah, make it fun, right? So one of the other things I definitely want to talk about, because I know so many companies, as you know too, are struggling still with the whole hybrid environment, right? Very perplexing. So even for the best companies, I will share that I had Catherine Matisky on my radio show earlier this year, and she wrote a whole book on managing virtual workforces. And one thing that she said to me, but that's in her book, that I think is a great practice, is she offers the idea of a team, what I'm calling a team charter. She called it something else. But essentially what it is the team together through the manager agrees on what does success look like here. And then what happens, what are the consequences if we step outside of those behaviors that, get in the way of us having success, kind of thing. They all agree together. So now there's common accountability and commitment to that charter. And I think that's a really great way to be able to steward in the hybrid environment. But other thoughts on how companies are or can make it work better for them?
Yeah, I mean, creating the ideal hybrid experience for everybody is really challenging, right? You've got to look at, how do you create an employee experience that's the same whether you're in the office or working remote? So developing the right policies, processes, culture. And so I love the idea of creating that kind of social contract or psychological contract between the team, of saying, hey, this is how we're going to do things. There's a couple companies out there that are trying to get into the hybrid, and they're going in and saying, there's Apple and Microsoft that are 2 to 3 days a week that they want you can work remote, and the rest you need to be on site. But there's others that are really leading the way, like Dropbox as an example. They're moving very virtual, right? They're basically giving everybody the choice to come in or not. And if you don't want to come in but you want to move, they're even allowing that. And then if you move outside of an area where there's an office, they're actually allowing you to create co-working if there's a few other people that are in that same area that can pull together. And so while I think that's interesting, the thing that I think is most interesting about what they've done is they've actually come up with this concept of core collaboration hours. And so while they're, advertising, they want everybody to have flexibility in how they, run their day, just like, you were speaking of earlier, is creating that social contract of how does the team want to work. they're saying as a company, we need some core collaboration hours where people are available. And so if you're getting hit up on Slack or, Instant Messenger, that somebody can hit you up and actually get you to collaborate with them in real time, just like they might be able to drop by and say hi to you if you were in your office. And I think that's a great example of one that's working very well for them.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Also nice build on the whole idea of the charter too. Okay, so the next thing we have to go on to, since this is the bit about investing in people here, one thing that you said is, which is, I think, spot on, true, and right, is you said that most people are not trained to be leaders. I completely agree with that. So you just left that there, and I wanted to see what was the rest of that for you.
Yeah, so people aren't really taught how to manage and lead employees. It's something you kind of pick up on the job, but not a lot of people are getting it in their training and getting it in classes and things. And now in traditional, work world, pre-COVID and pre-pandemic, when people were, coming into the office every day, some of that can get covered up because you can kind of make up for it by doing a quick drop by on an employee. Employee can check in if you didn't give them enough context on a problem. But porter leadership, as we move to, more remote and hybrid, that's not going to go unnoticed. It's actually going to be amplified. And so I really think there needs to be a little bit more education and training around what's important about building trust with your employees, and then taking that trust and really increasing the communication and context around, setting the context around delegating work and setting context around when you want things done and what the deadlines are. So it does kind of relate to that, ways of working and the social contracting, but really it's about giving them that training of how do you say what your vision is, A, for the hybrid, but B, for your team. How do you articulate that, build a shared understanding about it, get people to actually buy in and commit to it, whether that be through a social contract or you're going to write guiding principles or however you want to do it. But really getting there so that you have that psychological safety to say, okay, it's okay to be flexible some days, and other days I have to be, at my desk or, in the office or in front of my computer for a certain number of hours. And I think if we're not doing that and managing that correctly, it's really going to create some discomfort for the employees.
Yeah, interesting. I don't know to what extent we talked about this, but the whole idea of people not being trained as leaders. So that is part of the reason that I wrote Purpose Ignited, was to be able to help them become inspirational leaders, which is really about, motivating to that the vision of what the organization is and who they can become as individuals. And then, of course, for managers on the front line as well. But you talk also too about helping to align leaders. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so it's actually very much on what you just touched on, is when you look at leaders that set out a strategy, often there's tensions between, two different departments that are both trying to set out their own strategies. And sometimes there's a tension between them where they're at opposition and they can't actually implement what they would like, or they haven't provided enough context or built enough, shared trucks amongst each other to say, hey, we'll figure out how to work this out. And so oftentimes we're called in to kind of uncover what the team's kind of interests, concerns, and risks are around the given strategy. And then really starting to get that shared understanding and build trust and safety within that group. And then we can take that down to the employees and start cascading the messages, because everybody's on the same page now. They're not just hearing the vision, but they're actually understanding what they may be giving up or some other group may have to give up to successfully implement that strategy. And so while they're not always going to be perfectly in agreement with it, they're perfectly aligned to support it. And so it takes a lot of conversations and workshops and things to bring that about, though.
Very well said, Jeff. Thank you. Okay, so this next question here, I think honestly that whatever you say has got to be worth the price of admission, and you totally have my rapt attention. So first, let me give you some context as to why this is so. I firmly believe that the world of work is one of the most fertile playgrounds we have available to us to help us realize our potential as human beings. Absent that place, I think it's really tough to be able to realize your potential. So you say that Paraveda is about helping people reach their potential. So how so? How do you do it?
Yeah, so we're new to Paraveda. Right? They acquired us in December, but a lot of people that worked at our firm was very familiar with them. So our cultures are very well aligned. And when we came in and they were saying that this was their purpose, we really want to understand, how do they manifest that? Like, what does this actually look like? And it's basically investment in their employees. They do a really, really good job of looking at, what do our employees really want to do? And so they make that time to connect with them and understand what's important to them. They've created this expectations framework, which has 5 personas or sets of skills that this is what it takes to be successful at each level. And then they assign them a mentor. And so they've got a mentor that's going to work with them. And every time we give feedback, we're a very open culture about feedback and trust. And so as you're getting that real-time feedback, you're working with your mentor on what do I need to kind of level my skill set up? Am I ready to be promoted? Can I get a stretch assignment? And so they're constantly investing in this to really help employees go as high in the company as they want. They're also challenging them to be thought leaders. That's a big thing with Paraveda and Thought Ensemble, is really pushing the boundaries of what's known and what people think could be possible. And then how do we go test that in our company and with our clients? And so we've got lots of different things internally around writing, points of view. And so we'll have a point of view on something that you will develop over time. That's an area that you want to be known for, which then also just kind of helps elevate you in your career.
Wow, I really, of course, am gobsmacked by that. I just think that is so critical. As I think it has to be center stage in any talent development program, certainly retention as well. And I see so few organizations that are focused on that. So I really, really appreciate you showcasing that and offering it as really an exemplar behavior for our listeners and viewers across the world. Beautiful, Jeff.
Thank you.
So let's grab our next break here. I'm Elise Cortez, your host. We've been on the air with Jeff Rabith, who is the Vice President of Thought Ensemble, a Paraveda company focused on helping clients achieve significant business transformation. We've been talking a bit about how to develop and invest in your employees, and the final segment we'll be talking about how to retain that talent. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Dr. Elise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Elise to speak to your organization, please visit her at elisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Elise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Elise, send an email to Elise, A-L-I-S-E, at elisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. One other announcement I want to share with you before we get back to Jeff is I did release a second book last August. It's called Passionately Striving and Why. That is actually a collection of 25 stories from women around the world that I found from Australia to Zambia who share their very intimate story of discovering their purpose and how they're now serving from it today. So it's one part education and one part inspiration. I hope you check that one out as well. If you're just joining the program, my guest is Jeff Rabith. He is the Vice President of Thought Ensemble, a Paraveda company focused on helping clients achieve significant business transformation. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. So for this last segment here, Jeff, we're really focused on helping our listeners and viewers think about ways to retain talent. I mean, so many people are literally running for the doors before they even have a job in hand, right? I mean, that's it. I'm out of here, right? Wait, before you go, could you do one more thing? So we did already talk about the notion of belongingness being a problem in companies in the first segment, but I wanted to give you a chance to see if there's anything else you wanted to weigh in on how increasing belongingness can actually help the retention problem.
Absolutely. And it kind of ties to this hybrid workforce now that we're dealing with, right? You'll notice that, employees we do pulse surveys in our company. And so, every 2 weeks we're surveying the employees just to kind of understand what's top of mind, how are they feeling? Do they actually feel connected to their employees and their coworkers? And we actually saw a dip. And so later in the pandemic, we're starting to see this dip. And I think it's because of this continued isolation from some of the coworkers. And so it doesn't afford a lot of opportunity to have a sidebar or hallway conversation. So to combat that, we've actually been starting to change a little bit about the dynamics of just how we run our meetings. And so for the first few minutes of most meetings, what we'll do is we'll actually ask a connecting type question. So we'll ask somebody to share what their personal best or professional best is for the week or the previous week. And that really allows us to see the other side, not just the work side of everybody. Allows you to find where you might have some common ground and where you can relate to one another. And often that, spawns side conversations, which just helps you feel like people care a little bit more. They know a little bit more about you. We also host belonging lunches. And so what we'll do is a lunch, and every time we have new employees hired, we ask them to tell us their story. And then they basically put together a small PowerPoint deck. We save that off. So you can learn about anybody in our company by what they had shared in their belonging lunch. But we always have a social component where we do breakout rooms and we'll play a game or just other ways to encourage people to connect. And then lastly, we're hosting actual virtual happy hours. And so we'll do breakout sessions in that one as well and have sidebar conversations, play card games. So we try to gamify it. But we're actually noticing that is making an impact on the belongingness. People are forming those connections with one another, even though we're, remote. Most of our employees are Dallas and Denver, but we do have a couple, across the U.S. as well. And so it's just another way of making them feel included and bringing them together.
So what I heard in that, Jeff, which is just beautiful, what I heard is, and this has been so interesting for me to follow over the last few years, is this coalition or collaboration of technology and humans. So what I hear you saying is, when people are working from home, of course, they're relying a lot on technology. You're finding ways to really, really elevate the social human connection experience together when they're at work. I think that's really beautiful and necessary.
I agree.
And there is an art and science to it.
And it's experimentation, right? We test things out, and some are better received than others. And the card games seem to actually work way better than we thought they would.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and then you find out who's competitive, don't you?
Yes, you do.
So one of the other things I had you think about and task you with, as it were, to come on the show and share also to build on this conversation, was any companies that were doing some sort of different or unusual things to retain talent. And you told me about what Airbnb is up to, and I really want to presence that for our listeners and viewers. So if you would say a little bit about what they're doing, I've got some notes that you gave me, so I want to make sure and bring it forth for our listeners and viewers. Again, the idea here is to give you an example, listeners and viewers, as to what other people are doing. So maybe you can find other ways to adapt it or use it in some way to be able to help your organization. So not saying you need to do all these same things, but this is an idea that seems kind of interesting to me. So Jeff, what are they doing?
Yeah, so Airbnb, right, one of their goals is they want to hire and retain the best employees in the world, right? And so if they limited themselves to only the talent pool and a commuting distance, it puts them at a disadvantage. And so, they want to recruit, they want a diverse set of communities contributing to their employee pool. And so what they've done is they said, okay, we're going to allow employees to work from anywhere that they want, and really kind of saying you don't have to be around the office. And so they basically said that, they can work from home, they can work, from someplace else, from a friend's house, anywhere they want in the U.S. They're also saying that you can work anywhere in the world. They have like 180 countries that they're working out all the tax challenges with, but you can work within 180 countries for up 90 days a year. And I think that's huge. I mean, if you think about that, you could go on vacation with your family and still work and contribute and have extra time wherever it is you'd like to be. And so this does raise attention for them, is if we're going to allow people to disperse across the US, they're also not changing the pay. So if you want to move from, say, San Francisco to the Midwest, you're not going to have to actually take a pay cut or anything if the cost of living is different. And so they're really looking at that and encouraging people to figure out where they want to work and live. And so as they create that tension, though, it's how do you still keep that belongingness and community? And so they're actually committed to bringing the employees together regularly for large gatherings. And they're going to fund that because it's going to be offset by some of the other costs of office space and things like that.
Wow. So, I mean, I can tell you right now that people that are listening to this are both going, oh my gosh, roll my eyes. I can't possibly do that. I don't want to do that. And some are going, that's kind of interesting. So what I think is compelling about that, and again, thinking about how do we make work compelling? How do we make work a place where people come alive and reach to give their very best? And when you give them a life that they couldn't otherwise get someplace else, that's pretty compelling, right? So,
Completely
if
agree.
if I had the chance, I mean, I lived in Spain and Brazil in my 20s. I want to go back and live in those countries again, or anywhere in South America, or Spain, or Portugal. If I could do that, now mind you, I am my own boss, so I could actually do that. But anyway, so very compelling. So the other thing that I think is really interesting about what Airbnb is doing is, it seems to me, is it's living its own purpose creatively as an employee benefit while promoting and awarding autonomy. So that is just really compelling to me, right? Really gorgeous, really creative. Like, hey, we're trying to get people to go move about the cabin, if you will, but in this case, about the globe, all right? And we're going to give that opportunity to our employees as well. So I think the opportunity in that for our listeners and viewers is to consider, what are you uniquely up to in the world, and how could you position that to really shine that light on your employees? I think that's an opportunity. Thoughts?
I agree. I think it's looking for those opportunities that align with your purpose, and then align with your employees' passions. And it's going to be somewhere in this flexibility of work. It's going to be, I think, the largest one to take advantage of for most companies. And so just looking for ways of creating that. Other companies are saying, hey, if you've worked with us for 5 years, we're implementing the ability to take a sabbatical. Parvate actually does that. I know Google does that. Several other companies have that concept. And so if you're there for long enough, then you get this extra benefit of being able to take a sabbatical.
Mm-hmm. Now let's map that back over to this other critical area it becomes so pronounced in the pandemic, and that would be the well-being and mental health problem, right? So if I'm able to take a sabbatical, we can now start to address some of those issues. And maybe even if I can live anywhere in the world, maybe, I just talked with a colleague of mine, her mother is having surgery for the next, several weeks. Well, if I can then be there to be present for her, so I'm not worried, right? All these things start to reduce that well-being problem that we've been registering. So choosing where we work can be so important.
Absolutely. And the flexibility, right? If you have the ability to talk with your manager or supervisor and say, hey, can I shift my work schedule slightly, right?
Right.
Still be
Right.
available, but shift it slightly so that I can actually take care of my parents or whatever that might be. That really does reduce the stress and the cognitive load. And I think it's an amazing opportunity for us.
I forget who I was talking with on air about this, but I personally have a real problem with having your derriere stapled in the seat from 8 a.m. until 5 p.m. on Friday, whatever it is. No flexibility about that at all. I just think that is a way to crush the human spirit. And it's been borne out in the research as well. And we were talking about how, gosh, if I could just start a little bit later on Thursday morning so I could hit that yoga class, would that be possible? Just maybe an hour later kind of thing, right? All the difference it would make. One, it increases their health, that they feel better connected to you, the employer, because you're giving them a little bit of latitude. So you don't need to go crazy all the way to the Airbnb thing here, but a little wiggle room can make a big difference.
Definitely showing that partnership, right? That the employee's there and they're going to go the extra mile for you, and where can a company go a little bit of that extra mile for them?
Yeah. Well, speaking of extra mile, I was really kind of surprised and amazed to know that your company, Parvate, is an employee-owned private company. So it seems to me that if I own part of this company, that would be a hard thing to walk away from. Seems like a pretty good way to retain talent.
Yeah, we definitely think that it is. The idea really is that the employee should own the company, right? They're the biggest. They should basically benefit from their efforts, and it will encourage them to work harder. And so that's, Bruce and Carrie, when this got started with Bruce, that was his kind of vision all the time, to create this as a employee-owned company. And so it's basically acts as kind of a retirement plan. And so as we perform better year in and year out, the stock price goes up, and every year you're awarded more shares in the company. And then if somebody were to leave the company, right, there is a vesting period, but then when you leave, there's a payment plan that gets made out to you, and you're paid out over time. And so while we don't want anybody to leave, we certainly do view this as an asset for the company. And it's a great motivator for us because it does give you that owner mentality.
Yeah, I was just going to say.
And they do a lot of great jobs of educating the employees as well on just personal finance and what this benefit really means to them.
Powerful, really powerful stuff. Which logistics company is it that's also employee led? It's not FedEx? Is it UPS?
There's Southwest. Or sorry, no, logistics wise, I don't know logistics wise. It might be, but I think Southwest is, but I don't know on the logistics side.
So I think if I'm right, and listeners and viewers, maybe you can weigh in with us and just let us know, set us straight here. It's the one where the drivers literally run to the front door to deliver the package. That's the one. I'm not kidding. I mean, it's so distinguished from other logistics, companies. Like, they cannot get out of that seat fast enough. They've all got to be super fit. Anyway, right. So, I love the motivation, right? Think about how that ownership mentality then factors into the decisions they make to steward the resources of your company, to make and opt into right choices with partnerships. I mean, to me, there's so much good stuff in that.
Yeah, there's a lot of benefits to it. People spend money like it's their own when it's an employee-owned company.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny. Sometimes when people say spend money like it's your own, sometimes that's not a good thing, right? People that are really good at spending
true.
large quantities of money and just throwing it into the wind, maybe not like that. But
Very true.
you also told me about something that I thought was pretty interesting in our conversation. This organization or this company that you use to give clients to gifts called Packed with Purpose. Do tell.
Yeah, so a couple years back, we were looking at, what can we do to just make a greater impact? And, through either the work that we did, and we thought we were doing everything we could do. And then we kept asking ourselves the question of, could we be doing more? And every year we give clients gifts, right? We're a consulting firm. We like to show our appreciation of clients and connect with them. And so we were trying to be more thoughtful about not just what we gave as a gift, but also just where did we source the gifts from? Could they have a higher social impact? So we did a little research and we came across this company, Packed with Purpose. It was formed in 2016. It's a woman-owned business, and its mission is really to create meaningful social impact while strengthening human connection. And that's really what we were looking to do. And so they source, so they source different things from basically all over the US and around the world. And it's really, they curate these gifted collections, and it's all from purpose-driven companies. And so these companies are either helping under-resourced women or, those that have barriers to employment, or supporting sustainability efforts within the world. And so, you get to go through the website and select out what it is you'd like in there. You can custom curate the boxes, and they just do a magnificent job of the presentation and just everything about it. But really the cause really resonated with us. And so we've been getting through them for the past couple of years.
And is there something that explains the gifts so when the clients get them, they understand why they're so meaningful?
Absolutely. So when you get the box, you actually open it up and there's a card in there, and each page, or a pamphlet in there. And on each page, one, it talks about the company. And then two, it talks about what the efforts do and how it's actually benefiting society, whether it's helping underprivileged folks or it's helping people with the barriers to employment, sustainability, and it gives a little track record. And then once you've gifted with them, they actually give us an annual report. And so we actually see their annual report about the difference in the impact that they've made, just to kind of gives us a good feeling of what our contributions went towards.
I am so happy you told me about them. They sound just like somebody I need to connect with.
They're definitely worth connecting with. They're amazing.
I don't know how it happened, Jeff, but we managed to go right all the way through the show, and we're at the end here. You know that the show is listened to by people across the world, that they are out to create those workplaces where people actually want to come to work and do their best, et cetera, as I mentioned before. What would you like to leave them with?
When it comes to attracting and retaining talent, get creative. Really look outside the box, and even ask your employees to generate ideas, because that's the group you're really trying to create, is more partners for them. And so, enlist their help in actually coming up with some of these strategies.
Wonderful way to finish, Jeff. I am so happy to have crossed paths with you. I meet the most amazing, brilliant people on the other side of the mic. So it's great to know you. I learned a lot from you today. And so do my listeners. Thank you so much for sharing your heart, your soul.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate learning from you as well. Thank you.
Awesome. Listeners, viewers, if you want to learn more about Jeff Rabeth and the work he and his team are doing at Thought Ensemble, you can start by going to the website Thought Ensemble, and Ensemble is ENSEMBLE.com. Last week, if you missed the live show, you can always catch it via recorded podcast. We were on air with Stephen M.R. Covey, author of the well-known and best-selling book, The Speed of Trust. We talked about his new book, Trust and Inspire, How Truly Great Leaders Unleash Greatness in Others. It was a very passionate conversation, jam-packed with inspiring leadership principles and practices you can immediately put into practice to elevate your business. Next week, we'll be on the air with Salim Ali, Distinguished Professor of Energy and the Environment at the University of Delaware, talking about his new book, Earthly Order: How Natural Laws Define Human Life. He'll expand on the central premise of his book, which rests on the idea that humanity has either tried to conquer or capitulate to natural order, whereas we should be seeking to understand latent structures and patterns that permeate all systems and develop an earthly order that is socially functional and sustainable. Should be an amazing conversation. See you there. Remember that work is an integral and important part of our lives and can be one of the best adventures and means of realizing our potential and making the impact we so crave. So let's work on purpose.
We hope you've enjoyed this week's program. Be sure to tune into Working on Purpose, featuring your host, Dr. Elise Cortez, each week on W4CY. Together, we'll create a world where business operates conscientiously, leadership inspires impassioned performance, and employees are fulfilled in work that provides the meaning and purpose they crave. See you there. Let's work on purpose.